So we're back with Wendy, and we are going to talk all about teens and sex. We left off last week discussing the lack of education for teenagers when it comes to their reproductive systems and, what happens when you do have sex instead of don't have sex. So here we are. Thanks for being back with us, Wendy.
Absolutely.
So I know, and and who doesn't, that teens are like a whole nother ball game, right? Like
Yes.
educating our children is awesome. We need to do it. And when I say teens too, I do want to include like middle school into this, right? Because that's, I think, where it starts, and then into high school. So where does that jump happen with sex education for for teenagers? And like, what do we need to be adding to this plate?
Yeah. And I think that's going to be different for every child. And if we are truly, doing the early and often, like you and I talked about, it really will transition into a natural organic place. So you know how they go. They all of a sudden they love you to death, and then they're into you like slide food under the door because they're hissing at you. So I mean, it really does like overnight. Did you see that with your kids? I know it was for me. It was like, oh wow, this is great. We're gonna make it through these teen years, and then almost overnight they were like, you know nothing. I
Yeah.
know it all. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You went from
Mhm.
being like super cool to like
Yeah.
really annoying and you don't know anything. Yeah, it is a weird switch. Like
And don't breathe. Your breathing annoys me.
you're
So
chewing
mhm.
annoys me. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything. There's nothing that doesn't annoy them, right? And that's normal and that's awesome. And I did do a series with somebody that's like a relationship specialist on teens and parents, right? So there's like a whole that's like a whole ball game right there on communicating with your teens and
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah.
But I am so excited to dive into this sex aspect of it with you. So, what do you feel like first of all is missing from sex education with teenagers?
I think we get scared that they're not going to hear us, that the storytelling has to stop, the conversation somehow has to be rushed or shoved down their throat. And it doesn't. You made a great point in our earlier segment about the driver's ed and the boundaries, and you're just going to have to be mad at me. And really just reinforcing these are our values. This is how we do it at our house. This is our boundaries. This is curfew. This is that, whatever your family situation is,
Yeah.
but not stopping the conversation, just naturally, organically having it up until, driving in the car is a great way to have organic conversation. Things you hear on the radio, things you see, things you hear from them talking to their friends in the back seat that you can, embark on later. And then when they get their license, having those conversations. So tell me about this, tell me about that. Just not stopping the conversation, not being scared to just push through, even though you think they're going to bite your head off. And it's not a lecture, it's just organic conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, if you're developing this from a young age, then that's great because it doesn't feel like a lecture,
Yeah,
right? But if
exactly.
you have teenagers now and you haven't been doing this from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Which fine, we're not judging like at all.
No,
But
absolutely. It's never too late, Nicole.
yeah,
It's never too late to start. I mean, there's so many cool audiobooks. One of my favorites, and I'm actually in the middle of it now, is The Sex Wise Parent. It's never too late to start dropping some of those developmental pieces in there. So,
yeah.
mhm.
So yeah, no judgment, right?
No, no.
If you're just now starting this journey.
Mhm.
But how does that look? Like what does that look like for you? These conversations?
I do a lot of TikTok and texting with my kids, so they're not going to listen to me lecture them. But if I see a story that I like, I'll forward it. They might read it, they might not. Most of the time, they do. There's a really good website called Scarletine that's an international website, and it's specifically for teenagers and sexual health and relationship development. So we'll sit at dinner sometimes and I'll say, hey, did you see this? Oh my gosh, look at this article. And they're like, oh my God, do we have to do this at dinner? It's really just picking natural organic times to throw something out there. I'm like, you got to give me 5 minutes, bruh. Even just 5 minutes. And just I
Yeah.
use a lot of humor. So
Yeah,
yeah.
which is I think that's good with them and
Mhm.
making it like casual and funny or
Yep.
fun, like for sure. I think like, yeah, I think using resources like YouTube and TikTok and stuff like that with the teenagers is
Meet
awesome.
them where they are. Yes, meet them
Yeah,
where they are. Now, do I also say, please don't get all of your medical information off of TikTok? Yes, I do.
right.
But like you said, I love what you said. I'm your Google. I'm your TikTok.
Yeah.
Look at that stuff. And nine, not 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 out of 10 times, they'll come to me and say, hey, do you think this is real? Is this true? And I'm like, well, let me say, oh, yeah, that's pretty good. Or no, let's go research that. So,
Yeah. So my daughter does the same. My teenager will be like, I saw this TikTok about X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, I don't know if that's true. And I'm like,
let me see that.
I'm not saying that
Mhm.
it's not true, but it doesn't sound right to me. So like, let's do some research, right? And then it's like we'll Google it together, kind of a thing.
Yes.
But
Yes.
and that's fine because I also don't want to ever teach my kids that like I think I know everything because I
No.
don't. None of us do, right? So I think that yeah, that's definitely one way to do it. And then yeah, just the whole besides her bringing stuff to me and being like, is this true? I do that. Like I have a
Yeah.
TikTok account and I'll see tax tips that I'm like, what? And then I'll send them to my accountant.
Yeah. Is this real? Is this true? Are they trying to sell me something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she's not on TikTok, and so she laughs at me sometimes, but I'm like, I'll legit just send her a TikTok and be like, "Is this accurate? Can we do this year?" And she's like,
Yes.
"Well, pieces of this are, but this
Yes.
isn't." But I'm like sending my accountant TikTok,
And
so that's my
telling your
life.
kids those stories because we don't know it all. We're not on some
Yeah.
pedestal. We have made mistakes. We are talking to them because we want them to have this information. And we have to research things too.
Yeah, and
So,
ask experts. Like,
absolutely.
look it up online, ask your own doctor, ask a
Yes.
friend that works in the field, like whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
But I agree that there is like this lack of communication with teenagers in general. Like that can even just be like we can go days without talking
Yep. Yeah.
because
And I
they
see that
just
a lot with dads and teenage girls because they are just petrified. They're either going to say something wrong, do something wrong, or they're
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh, my baby looks like a 25-year-old woman. And so really helping the
Mm,
dads and the families to just get in there. You can do this. Just
yeah.
one little conversation a day.
Yeah, that goes back to the whole like don't make it uncomfortable and awkward. Like it is more uncomfortable and awkward for a dad to have a talk with his 17-year-old daughter than it is for a mom to, right?
Mhm.
And it's
Yep.
more uncomfortable. Like, I mean, when my son is that age and I'm gonna have to be like, hey, can you stop with the 3 hour long showers every day? Like when those kind of conversations have to start
Yeah.
happening,
Hmm.
like it's gonna be more awkward than it would be to have conversations with my daughters.
Right.
It's just kind of that's a natural
But you're
thing
gonna
for
do it
I'm
anyway.
gonna do it anyway and no
Mhm.
problem, and he's gonna be like, "Oh my god, mom," and I'm gonna be like, "Well, like, either."
I'm just saying, just letting you know. Fact
Yeah,
check me. That's what I say to
yeah.
mine. Fact check me. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm,
And my teenage daughter and I are very close and we do talk about everything. I mean, now that she's a mom, like sex education
mhm.
has reached its peak. So,
Yep.
we don't have any issues there, but we also didn't prior to the pregnancy. So, like, let's talk about that, right? Because a lot of people came at me, right, as this
Mhm,
mom of like, well, if you would have taught her, if you would have educated her, if you would have had her on birth control, if
right,
you weren't so busy trying to be her friend and acted
mhm,
like a mother, this wouldn't have happened. Or if you would have
mhm,
set boundaries, it wouldn't have happened. Which,
right.
first of all, let's face it, boundaries really has nothing to do with teaching sex education. And the sex education that she had was very open, very blatantly honest. I mean, this whole I am your Google thing to the
Yeah.
point where she came home from school in middle school one day and goes, Mom, I have to ask you something. And I'm like, What? And she goes, Somebody today at school was talking about a rim job. And she's like, I
Oh
want
my
to know what it is. And I was
god.
like,
Okay.
How? And I was like, Okay, so I told you I would answer any question for you and I would answer it honestly. But I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is not probably what you're expecting to hear. And it may be more than you want to hear. So are you sure you want this
Informed
information?
consent. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
And she was like, I want it. And I was like, okay. So
Okay.
I very
Mhm. Mhm.
very quickly just kind of like an overview of what a rim job is. And
You're
she
like,
just stood there like,
"Oh, I
ew.
asked for
And
that."
I was like,
Exactly.
that's what it is. And she was like, thanks for telling me, and walked away. And I
Uh,
said, well, thank you for asking me.
Thing
So
that's it.
this is how I've raised her. Like, I did not forget to educate my child, and I did not forget to
Right,
make it safe to come to me.
and that's not gonna push them into doing something you don't want them to
No,
do.
it's
We
not.
somehow think that we can control it all, and
Yeah.
we can't. This is not about education is not about controlling them or bullying them. It's about giving them roots and wings. We want them to have us as roots, but we also want them to have this knowledge to fly and be independent. So
Yeah.
this isn't about controlling and stopping and preventing. It's about knowledge is power, protection, and
Yeah.
some part prevention.
Yeah. So then, like, to the our relationship was strong enough to the point where the first time she had decided to be sexually active, um, she had had a therapist for a while. And so she asked me to come into her next therapy appointment with her. So I went into her therapy appointment with her, and she's like, I need to tell you something. And she's like, I had sex. Right. And I was like, okay. And I said, I appreciate your honesty. I'm glad you came to me and told me. And I said, she had not been to a gynecologist yet at this
Mhm,
point. And
mhm.
so I said, like, you've made a very adult decision, and there is adult responsibility that comes along with sex.
Natural development, what comes next?
Yeah. So I said,
Gynecology.
so I'm going to make you an appointment with a gynecologist,
Mhm,
and I would appreciate you going on birth control. I'm not giving you permission to have sex. You are not allowed to have sex.
mhm,
We need to take some extra measures to make sure I'm not putting you in situations where it's easy for you to have
mhm.
sex. But I
Right.
would like to make sure you're extra protected. How do you feel about that? Because I also didn't want to force birth control on her.
Roots and wings, yep.
So then when we went to the OB, I left the room. Like, I came in at the beginning because she
Mhm,
wanted me to. Then I said, I'm leaving the room. Your doctor and you can discuss what forms of birth control are available to you
mhm.
and what to expect from them. And then you can decide with your doctor what feels right to you. And I went out and waited in the waiting room. And that was that, because I wanted to give her a free open space, because I'm her mom and sometimes they
Yep,
don't want to tell us everything, to
right.
talk openly with her doctor.
And
Um,
what did you just model for her then? You modeled for her privacy, consent,
yeah.
respect,
Yeah,
which went full circle back to our first segment with open, honest, transparent communication from the changing table to present.
right, right.
Mhm,
So then she's on birth control. Let's fast forward a year,
mhm,
right? Sex education, we're very open about. She's in her first serious relationship with a guy, like serious, serious, like I'm in love with this boy.
and you just
And
nailed it. Love, children know how to love. Teenagers do feel sexual love and
yeah,
desire.
yeah.
Mhm,
And and the boy was a catch. Like, we still really, I mean, like, I really care. He was a great guy. So she's in this relationship with this guy,
mhm,
and I knew where it was going, right? Like, I'm like, this is definitely going to become a sexual relationship. So what are the boundaries there? How do we have this conversation? And this is something I think a lot of parents struggle with. Educating your kids about sex and keeping them safe if they have sex, while at the same time not giving them permission to
yes.
have sex.
Mhm.
So for me, you can tell me if I screwed up anywhere, because I would love to know.
You're
But,
doing
like,
great.
for me,
Mhm,
it was, I can't control everything all the time, and she needs to have some freedom.
mhm,
So I would never let her spend the night at his house. He was not allowed to spend the night here.
mhm,
Um, she wasn't allowed to go to a party without parent supervision
mhm.
and spend the night or anything like that.
Right.
They had to tell me where they were going and what they were doing if they were hanging out.
Mhm.
If she was going to his house, I had to know his parents were home.
Who's
And
supervising?
yes, so
Mhm,
I would call the mother. Like, I had her number. I would call and say, "Just want to make sure you're home. My daughter's on her way to your house." Like, "Yep,
mhm.
I'm here." I'm like, "Cool, thanks."
Yep.
Um, she got lazy with her birth control pills at one point. So then I like, this is where I got strict mom on her. She had missed 2 days of her birth control pills, because they're like, we keep all of our medicines in the kitchen, right? So I could see it.
Mhm,
And I was like, "Hey, you missed 2 days of your pills. Like, so do you remember what that means?" And she's like, "No." I'm like, "Cool. So go look up the brand of birth control you take online and look at what it says on the website."
mhm,
And she's like, "Well, it says if you miss a pill, like, it takes 7 to 14 days for it to be fully effective again." and da 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 da. So it's like, cool. So now when you want to see your boyfriend for the next 7 to 14 days, it's at our house supervised by me. And she was like, that's not fair. And I said, let's call it house sex arrest. Like, I don't know if you're having sex or not, but I don't want you to come home pregnant. So when you guys hang
That
out,
yes, open, honest, transparent
yeah,
communication. There's no
yeah,
secrets. This is just teaching them how to have the wings to fly out of your home and be successful.
yeah. This is just a side note. If you feel like you're being like, I created an environment where it was very hard for her to have sex, right? Like there always had to be supervision if they were going, otherwise they were at the mall or the movies or whatever,
Yep.
which they could have sex in a car or a parking lot or a playground or
Right.
whatever, right? So I've created this environment, and then she goes to this new boy's house. I call the mom. I say, our kids are not in a relationship, but I know they're sexually interested in each other. So if my daughter's coming over, you have to be home and supervising. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I will make sure the same. I would like to be able to call you to confirm that. And she was like, yes. Her version of supervising and mine did not align. And
Right.
that is where my daughter got pregnant.
Mhm.
So this is very important. You can do all the right things, but your communication with other parents at this age, I feel like is so important. And your
Right.
kids will hate you for the
Yes.
moment if you set these
Mhm.
boundaries. But it's as simple as her version of supervising was like, I'm going to go watch a movie downstairs. They can hang out in the bedroom upstairs.
Right. Right.
And so she got pregnant. I mean, and if
It
they
just
didn't do it
shows
there,
that
they
you
could have done
can't
it somewhere
control it
else.
all.
But
It just shows that you did everything the way you felt you could do. And we
yeah,
can't control it all. And talking about what you said about having open dialogue with parents, that's with 5-year-olds going to the neighbors for play dates. My kids know I'm that crazy mom who's in your house for the sleepover? Are there guns in your house? Are there any siblings? So that conversation with the parents starts at birth too. So
yeah. Yeah, I think it is really, I mean, you don't have to be best friends with everybody's parents, but
yeah,
if your kids are spending the night at somebody else's house or they're spending, hours on in there on the regular and stuff, like you should definitely know who they are and
absolutely.
like where they're, like if you guys align in any
Mhm,
way, because, they could be buying your kids beer, letting them take the car out at 14 or whatever, because they're
mhm.
like, I mean, I definitely had friends whose parents let us take the car out at 13, 14 years old. And we're like, their dad's so cool. But he was really just
Yep.
passed out
Can't beat
drunk on the
that.
couch. And so
Yep,
we got to go out in the car. Like,
exactly.
I think everybody's got that one friend's parents that do
Mhm.
that. So,
And I like the way you use the word didn't align. And I think we can say that to our own kids is that doesn't align with our family values. That's just not a judgment. It's just not, doesn't align with us.
yeah.
So,
So now
yeah.
that I've shared this, like how I dealt with it, but it still happened, right?
Right.
Like it still
Yeah.
happened. So let's go back to like the birth control aspect of that for a minute. Like you've had the conversations with your kid.
Mhm,
You've explained that what sex education is, and we've talked
mhm.
about their health and the reproductive health and like all this. So how do you feel about teenagers in birth control?
I am a big fan of reproductive rights, and birth control is one of those rights. And so I'm in the school of thought with you that I'm going to take you to your doctor and you're going to make informed decisions about your health with your doctor. If you need me there, I'm happy to do so. If you want me to just make the introduction, I'm happy to do that and leave and go in the waiting room like you did. So I'm a big fan of giving them the information and trusting that they're going to use it to the best of their ability, the roots and wings. Mhm.
And I guess like just yeah, letting them make their own choice about their bodies. Cause I agree with you. Like I've been on birth control since I was like in high school and
Mhm.
I have some issues now that I feel like are partly because of being on birth control so
Birth
long of my
control.
life. Yeah.
And
So
there's some research on that, and I would say definitely stay on top of the research with that. But there are conditions that are helped with birth control. So it's
yeah,
really doing our research,
that's where I am too. Yeah.
having a great relationship with your OBGYN or your family medicine doctor. Because I know here there's some wonderful family medicine docs that we refer to besides just OBGYNs.
Yeah.
And if you have the right fit and you feel like you can really have great conversations, um, Yeah.
Yeah. And if you have a pediatric doctor that you really trust, ask them for recommendations for a
Mhm.
gynecologist or an OB. Like, I feel like, I mean, that's what we did. I sent her to one that was different than mine when we put her on birth control. And then she switched to mine for the OB services when she got pregnant because they didn't
Mhm.
offer OB at
For
the other
that.
one.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
I wanted somebody who's worked with a lot of teens. Like, that was
Yes.
important to me. I didn't just want to send her to any gyno doctor. I wanted her to
Yes.
have someone that has a reputation for understanding and being good at communicating with the
Yeah.
teenager.
And somebody who aligns with your family values, somebody who's not going to be judgmental, somebody who's going to peel back the layers and look at, the mental health piece. Because I mean, 50 to 60% of teen moms run the risk of postpartum depression. So they're 2 times more likely to develop a postpartum mood disorder than their regular counterparts.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me, but like let's talk about that. Is that to do with their brain is still developing and that their hormones are still fluctuating so much?
Yeah. So a prior history of depression can exacerbate that. And then you add the extra stress of being a teen mom and the hormonal changes and the layers, if there are any, of shame and guilt.
How could
So,
there not be?
right.
You say
It's
if there is
multi-layered.
any, but like I
Mhm.
feel like what new mom in in today's age doesn't have like some kind of shame, like they don't think they're doing
Yeah.
everything right, and
Yeah.
like we are so hard on ourselves.
We
So
are.
you to look at that aspect of it, but then you also bring in this like aspect of like the judgment
Yes.
piece.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so big, right? I mean, like we all are judged all the time, like as mothers in general. Like I still get judgment. I'm not a teen mom anymore,
Yep.
but like for the teenagers it's so much more. Like it's from their peers, it's from adults around them, you
Right.
know.
And by having these
Sometimes it's from their
conversations,
family.
yes, and by having these conversations early and often and really being a good steward of their development, not controlling it, not helicoptering it, but doing what you did gives them that gift of self-esteem and confidence. So now that she is a mom and as she grows into this role, hopefully she won't worry as much like you did or I did in the future. They don't pay my bills. They don't do this for me. They don't do that for me. I'm just going to live well. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this is a lot about like female, right? Because I have a teenage daughter, right?
mhm,
But and then we're talking about birth control and stuff. But what do you
yep.
think about with a boy, with a son? Like, do you provide condoms? What do you do in that situation?
That is going to be that's going to be up to each family. But for me, I warned you in the beginning, I'm very open with those things. And I
Hmm.
feel like all children, male, female, transgender, non binary, should have conversations about how to protect their sexual health. If that means that I take you to the drugstore and we walk down the aisle and we look at all of the different condoms and what will protect against sexually transmitted infections and what will not, then that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a field trip.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
because I feel like in some instances you have the moms and dads that say, "Do you need? Are you sexually active?" No, I'm not, because
we're
they're
just
gonna
going to
say
have a
no
field trip. We're just going to
most
have
of
a
the
field
time.
trip.
Yeah, and then
Mhm.
you ask, "Do you need condoms?" And they're like, "No, I'm
Oh,
good."
no, no, no. They just want it to go away. They don't want to have that conversation. It's
Uh-huh.
awkward. No, no, I'm good. I'm good.
And
I'm
you
good.
maybe don't want to either. So you're like, "Okay, cool.
Okay,
Good
good.
talk.
Mhm,
Like,
yep.
have a nice day."
Exactly.
Yeah,
Mhm, yeah.
and then your kids get somebody pregnant.
Right. And I
Or get
mean, you and
pregnant.
I talked about this before. I feel like our young men need to see, what are these reproductive options for girls, these birth control options for girls. And we all need to know, regardless of gender, what birth control is, what a barrier method is, what this sexually transmitted infection could do to this young man, to this young woman. They need to know it all,
Yeah,
cross gender. So
yeah.
it builds
And
empathy.
well, right. And it's interesting too, because we're talking about birth control for girls and condoms for boys, but there's really no law that says you can't buy your daughter
Right.
condoms as well. I think
Exactly,
I
because
think the
I don't want
hard
their tubes getting blocked because of pelvic inflammatory disease, and then their tubes are wrecked and they can't have babies. They have to have IVF. So, and
yeah,
that's not a judgment, that's just an observation. So,
right. Well, and then I think on top of that, it's like I think the tricky part with condoms is like making sure that they fit appropriately.
Right. And then it breaks, and there needs to be some sort of education, whether it be with a vibrator or banana that shows how you keep enough at the end so it doesn't break or spill.
Well, and right. And I think like, because don't you see like a teenage boy being like, oh, I need a large,
Of
but they
course.
don't need a large, right? And like things like that. So either they're too big or they're too
Too
tight.
small.
And then they're either breaking or it's not really holding in semen because it doesn't fit appropriately and it's too big, or it comes off inside of her.
Right.
So then it's not effective, right? So
Exactly.
there's all these layers that sex education, that like the conversations when you get to that point with your kids about like the birth control type of conversations and the sex protection, like the
Mhm.
sexually transmitted disease
Right.
protection, and having those conversations around that. Because we definitely, like with birth control, I was like, reminder, like this does not prevent sexually transmitted diseases. Like you need to use two forms of protection if you're having sex,
Right.
right?
I know.
That are just like
We've got
not
so much to do, don't we? We've got to educate them all. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Have you heard of the book, A Teen Girl's Guide to Getting Off?
No,
That's a good one too, because it really gets into exactly what you're talking about. The mechanics as well as the consent, the pleasure, the birth control. So that's a good one too. We'll add that to our list.
that's an interesting topic. Orgasms.
Yep.
And I was thinking back to when I was a teenage girl and had all this sex with all these people. And I can tell you, it was like not probably until I was like 20 that I had an orgasm.
See? And those are things
And
to talk about.
right. And I was like, I bet you that's so common because first of all, I'm sorry, no offense if you're a teenager and listening to this, but y'all don't know
Yep.
what you're doing. And
Right.
like, so, and I didn't even know like what to expect,
Mhm.
right? Like you're having sex and you're like, that was great. We're done now. Like you don't realize that there is this climax piece of it because we aren't educated in that,
Right.
right?
That's
Like,
part of our
well,
talks
and that's
early
like
and often.
that's got to be the most awkward part of the conversation with a kid is like, and obviously, like this isn't you don't talk about climaxing with like your 7-year-old, yeah?
Well, hold on. Let's go back there
Do
a second.
you? Let's talk about it.
So with the trauma piece, that is what perpetrators will do to kind of rope a kid in and manipulate them. And in a sex talk, so with trauma focused behavior therapy, I will talk with parents and kids about what that, I hate the word grooming, but what that manipulation looks like. And it's, our bodies respond naturally. So that could feel really good. And so what do you, and then we'll get into scripts about how you can, set boundaries, say no, or if something does happen, to deal with the shame of that felt good. Now I'm embarrassed. What do I do to
Mm,
tell and get help? So we talk a lot about what that feels like, what that looks like, what that sounds like. So yeah,
I didn't realize that was used as a grooming tool.
absolutely. Yep.
Because it just
It's a
seems I think of it
manipulative
as like
tactic.
a end game thing, not a starting game thing. So yeah,
Yes, it's a
that I'm glad
manipulative
you said that.
tactic. It's a manipulative tactic to get you in and make you think that you are
A part of
consenting.
it.
And yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. So when you're I feel like back to this teenager thing is when you're talking to a teenager about sex, like talking about climaxing
Mhm.
feels like you're having a conversation about how awesome sex is when you're trying to tell your kids they shouldn't have sex.
Right.
And so it's like like that's tricky, and like now that I mean my teenager's a mom, so like we've had these conversations, but like not I don't know. I feel like there's such a freaking fine line there because like
So,
I mean,
so
I think this is more towards women, right? Because like boys typically will climax
right.
in
And there's
at that
two
age.
different directions there, right? So if we rewind it to if kids need to know between 7 and 9 how intercourse happens and how babies are made, that's where you have that part in of your family values of, this is what's called an orgasm or a climax. That feels really good, but that's between two people who agree or consenting. And if say if it's say you're wanting it between married people. I mean, there's all kinds of ways, but you say, that's what mommies and daddies do, and that's the way we want to talk about it. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios that you can plug in that fit your family needs. But yeah, you're going to talk about climax and orgasm way back.
But
It
what if
fits
you
in
didn't have
organically.
that talk?
Right. So then fast forward, you're talking about it now, and that gets into consent. Okay, talking about girls, for instance, what you said a second ago, we need to teach them that desire and pleasure are your perfect right. That's your perfect right to healthy sexual expression, healthy sexuality. Working hard to remove the shame, working hard to expose them to age appropriate documentaries. And I mean, did you guys watch 13 Reasons Why together? I mean, I loved that
I
because it
haven't
gave
seen
us
it.
we watched that together, and it gave us so much juicy content to
Yeah,
talk
I
about
believe it.
consent and drugs and rape. I was like, oh my God, thank you, 13 Reasons Why. And so I would
Hmm.
literally pause it like every 5 minutes.
Yeah, we did
And
that with the Fosters
yeah,
and Gilmore Girls, I think. And then
yes,
there was one other one I can't remember that I love that. I love watching those shows with my teenage daughter as
gives you lots
conversation
of stuff.
starters.
Yep.
And it's a
So
good way to bond.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's a
Absolutely.
great technique. Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure.
And it's not a lecture. It goes back to that storytelling. I'm a huge fan of storytelling. We could do a whole nother thing on storytelling, but yeah.
So, okay, so what about in a situation like with because we're talking about climaxing, how do you feel about conversations about masturbation? And like, do you have those conversations from the beginning as well, or do they develop later? And then what
From
does
the
that
very
look
beginning.
like?
From the very beginning, little boys get erections in utero. This is a natural, organic
Oh
part
yeah.
of us as human beings. And so that is a great segue from when they're little and an erection happens, and you can start talking about privacy. And that's your special thing. You're the only one that's allowed to touch that unless it's the dot. And we can go back to your first series and revisit that. But it leads us into the conversations about that's yours. Nobody's allowed to touch at it or look at it but you, and you're not allowed to look at or touch at anyone else's. So yeah, masturbation and not freaking out and saying, oh my God, what are you doing? No, that's yours. That feels good. It's special, but we don't do it in front of people. That's privacy. Where's your special place? You can go to your room and do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
But
Mhm.
with the like with teenagers and masturbation, like normally it's just, I mean, the way I've always looked at that is like you just respect each other's privacy. You don't need to have like,
Mhm.
but and it's, it's usually more noticeable with them, right? Because it's like, oh, we're taking
Mhm.
all of a sudden we still smell, but we're taking hour showers every day and like, that
Right.
kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But do you think there needs to be, if you hadn't, again, if you have not been having those conversations with them since they were little,
Mhm.
do you think that there needs to be a conversation around masturbation with them? Um, because I feel like there's still a level of like safety and protection
Mhm.
that like
Mhm.
needs to happen around, which I don't think anyone like well, not anyone, but like most people don't talk about. But like, I mean, I'm
Like,
gonna really call myself out here, but like I remember like my early on experiences with masturbation were definitely not tools of masturbation. And like probably lucky that I didn't end up in an awkward situation or damaging myself because of like using what was available.
okay. Okay. So I think if you have cause, like you're suspicious about something, or I don't wanna use the word suspicious, if you have signs that something is going on that necessitates that, by all means, just check in without, shaming or flipping out, and just clarify and give alternative
Right.
advice, like the book A Girl's Guide, Teen Girl's Guide to Getting Off. There's also some
Sounds like
great
an
books.
interesting book.
You can read, parents can read the books for prompts to be able to give that. The Sex Wise Parent, that's another good one. So doing that research for ourselves so we can then arm ourselves with the knowledge to then have those conversations. But as far as masturbation, just having that conversation that it's private, because that can segue into pornography and what your family's view is on pornography
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how it's,
Yeah.
not healthy for a growing teenage brain to get hooked on that. because it
Right.
doesn't foster consent, or there's a difference between
Right.
overall
Well,
and
that's, yeah,
permission.
that's, I mean, like, listen, like, I don't have any problem with porn, but I do see
Right,
with the adolescent's mind, like, it
right,
is the role playing and the aggressive behavior and things
right.
that we see
The
very
type of
common.
porn.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
very
Mhm.
common. Like, those pop up regularly. So, like, that kind of stuff is a little like that could put some bad ideas or at least bad, I don't know, to think that that's what sex should look like
Right,
because
and
it
that
doesn't
brings
have
us
to
full
look that way.
circle. Right, that's why it brings us full circle back to why we are starting and hoping that people will listen to your podcast and say, "Hey, I'm gonna start today," whether they're 3, 10, 12, 15, because we have to be good stewards in educating them. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, working in child abuse, there's Shrek porn, there's all kinds of porn. So if you've got a kid who loves Shrek and they're Googling something and that comes up, and it's so real life, and seeing those types of things that our kids are exposed to, we have to do something to educate them and try to keep them safe. So
Yeah. It's scary too when you think about it because there
yeah,
is all that kind of stuff out there and like the anime and stuff. And it's like that all feels like
so
like
much
it's
to do.
directed at them.
Because it is. Yep. hmm
Ooh, that's like a whole nother
It
conversation that I
is.
don't
We need
like.
to, I know it really is. And there's just so much work to be done. That's why I'm glad you're doing this podcast. So just even if it's just one person that hears it, that's the ripple effect. That's the change that's going to happen.
Well, don't say that. I want more than one person to listen to my podcast.
Okay. So, but all we need is one to make the change.
20,000, like,
There
we'll go
you
there.
go. There you
Um,
go. So,
so yeah, no, I agree though, I agree. I love that the way that this conversation has gone. I think that, like, I know that when we talked previously, like, we really are diving into sex education, but I love how much we've tied in, sexual assault into this conversation and, like,
mhm,
I feel like there is so many pieces of sex education that are dropped, right? Like masturbation and
mhm.
like this, just what happens if you do get pregnant and what does that look like? And the support system that a pregnant teen needs. Like, and I'm going to say this just because it's my life is like if you're a mom and you have a teenage son or daughter and they get someone pregnant or they're pregnant, they need you now more than ever. And
Yep.
like you're allowed to be upset that this happened and you're allowed to feel
Absolutely.
frustrated and you're allowed to be
Mhm.
terrified. Like by all means, like there was not a day that like someone didn't say anything random. Like my best friend would come over and be talking to me about like a client she had yesterday
Mhm.
and I would randomly start bawling. And she's like, "What did I say?" And I'm like, "You didn't say anything. My teenager's pregnant." Like I was just a mess, right?
Yeah.
I was but not in
Process. You were trying to
yeah.
process all of that information and that
Yeah.
shock. Yeah.
And it is so hard and it is so scary and the lack of resources
Yeah.
like, unfortunately, like, here's the thing, like, you go to the doctor, you go and then there's, like, women's centers, right? And
Mhm.
then there's abortion clinics. All 3 say that they're there to advise and talk to you about all of your options and help you figure out what's right for you. No, they don't. Every single one of them has an alternative motive, and they all
Yep.
know what decision they want you to make, and they try to manipulate you into that decision. Every single place.
You were doing the best that you could at the time. You
Yeah.
learned through that experience, and now you're doing this so you
Yeah.
can give people
Yeah.
the proper information. So,
Well, and get your teenager a therapist. Like we were in there, we were prior, but then like when she was pregnant, she wasn't seeing a therapist. So I called a friend who's a therapist and said, "Here's what's going on, and I need her to have a good therapist." Like,
yeah,
so she got me in with somebody that she knew would be a good fit for her. And
yes,
like that has not stopped since, right? Like since the day
right.
she found out she was pregnant to now her son being 6 months old, she's seeing the
Yes.
same therapist because
And therapy and counseling does not mean you are broken and you need fixing.
no,
I will
I have a
shout that from the
therapist.
rooftops. Yes, development. Therapists should have therapists. Everybody should have that special person because it's developmentally appropriate. We can't see the forest for the trees with our own stuff.
No.
So it's nice to have that person, that special person to just kind of walk you through.
Mhm.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, and they call you out on your bullshit, and I love that.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
and you don't and I didn't even think about that. I was like, "I'm going to therapy because of all these people that piss me off." And then I get into therapy and I was like, I have a lot of work to do on myself. I was like, oh shoot,
Oh,
dang
exactly.
it.
It's like, what
I
was
can
my
be a
part in that?
yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
I have controlling issues and need to let go. Weird. Um, I thought I just had to be controlling because nobody else knew how to do their own shit. Like
Well,
that,
it's
you know.
worry, it's anxiety. It's
Yeah.
because you're worried about your peeps and your family and your
Yeah.
friends, and it comes
Oh my
across as
gosh.
controlling, but it's really our anxiety. Yeah.
And I
That's
swear
why we go to therapy.
when you become a parent, it's like part of delivering a child or adopting a child or however you become a mother or father.
Mhm.
However you have a child, the second you have the child, you also get like a new whole chunk of anxiety pushed into your brain. It's like
Exactly. Nobody warns
parenting
us
and
that.
anxiety are just like they just here you
Best
go. Here's
friends.
extra anxiety for you.
Yep, you're best friends. Mhm.
Yeah, it is crazy. But this teen mom support system thing is like what I was trying to say anyways, is just that like you can be mad and angry and sad and terrified and
And
you don't
still hold
have
space for
to
them.
yeah,
Mhm.
and you don't have to like this isn't a death ticket. Like it's really not. This is you can still do all the things. It's harder. And
Yep.
they're going to have to work a lot harder if they're in that situation. If they choose to keep the baby, by all means, like you have three options. But no matter what option your child takes, they need therapy.
Well, and that therapy will just reinforce that we are naturally resilient.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're proving that right now. So,
Yeah. And I think that like you have to let go of control. You cannot make your child's decision for them. Give them space to make their own decision because
mhm.
at the end of the day, you're not always going to be there for them.
Yep,
And they're going to live with whatever choice they make the rest of their lives.
that's
So it
right.
needs to come from their heart,
Yep.
whatever it
You
is.
can tell them that I'm giving you roots and wings to fly. I
Yeah.
have to pump all this stuff into you, and then you take it and do what with it
Mhm.
what you will.
Yeah. And by like also understand that like you get to set boundaries. Don't use them, but remember boundaries are not made to be a threat, right? So it's like if you find out your child is pregnant, this isn't, well, if you keep the baby, you can't live here. That's a
Right. It's not a
threat,
morality
right?
punishment. Right.
That's a threat. But like a boundary would be like, okay, so if you choose to have this baby, that means you're choosing to grow up early and be an adult. So we are going to support you until you graduate and give you time and space to save money and figure out what you need to do next, but you will need to come up with a plan. That
Yep.
is a boundary.
Logical, healthy, natural developmental process.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's whatever it looks like for your family. Like my daughter is welcome to live with us with her baby through college. If
Mhm.
she's going to go to college and wants to only work part time because she wants to be able to get the career that she chooses, then she's welcome to stay with us.
Right.
But that's
The
okay if that
goal
doesn't
isn't to
work for
punish.
you.
Right. Because the goal isn't to punish, the goal is to teach.
Yeah. And like I also life is already going to be harder for her. I would like to in any way make it not.
Yep.
And I can, but that's
That's
okay
very
if that
good.
doesn't work for you. You know what I mean? If you already don't have a very good relationship with your teenagers and they're incredibly rebellious and this is
Mhm.
like an ongoing thing of disrespect and you just don't even feel like it's toxic, then by all means set a end
Another
date
boundary.
and
Mhm.
another boundary. Like that's fine. But your kid is about to go through the hardest, most grown up choice they've ever had to make in their life. And it's the
Mhm.
first one they'll ever have to make. So
And
if you're
what are you doing? You're modeling empathy, you're modeling compassion, you're modeling healthy boundaries, you're modeling logic, natural development. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So just please, if you're listening to this podcast and you just found out you have a teenager that's pregnant, send me a message. Like I will be your person right now if you need that. Like don't freak out and kick your kid out. Like that's just not the answer. Your kid's already going through enough.
Right.
But,
And
you
don't be
know,
afraid to talk to them about masturbation and porn.
yeah. And trying to avoid this teen pregnancy, do the best you can at keeping lines of communication open. But no, ultimately your children they're not your robot.
Yep.
And no matter how much parenting you do and how much you tell your kids not to do something or how much you pretend sex doesn't exist to your children,
Mhm.
it could still happen.
Exactly. And you want them to be healthy, that you want their sexual health to be just that, healthy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wendy, is there anywhere that people can find out more information from you if they would like to try to get in contact with you?
Yeah, innersolutionscounseling.com. And it's Wendy,
Perfect.
WINDY.
And I
Mhm.
will link that below as well, as it sounds like we might have a lot of links on this one,
Yeah.
which I love because
Yeah.
you are so informed on so many awesome resources. So
Yes.
if you're only listening to this, which is part two, or if you heard part one, either one, I'll list all the same
Yes.
resources. So we have those there with all the books and all the
Mhm.
fun stuff. So
And I'll send those over to you.
thank you so much for being here with us today.
It was so much fun. Thank you for being you.